Good evening. My name's Alex Brody, and today I'm going to be talking about sexual harassment on the college campus for my women's studies forum assignment. Just a heads up, I apologize for my voice. I'm sick right now, so if my vocals are a little bit creaky, I'm sorry. But so let's jump into it. I'm going to be talking about sexual harassment on the college campus, and I'm going to attempt to cover both the definition of sexual harassment. I'm going to get into some statistics about how often it happens and where it happens and who it happens to. I want to cover what constitutes sexual harassment, because that's an issue with a lot of my guy friends that I hear about a lot is what constitutes sexual harassment. There's a bit of a gray area, I feel like, in understanding. And finally, what we can do as schools and students to prevent sexual harassment going forward. So let's start by defining sexual harassment. According to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, sexual harassment is defined as unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. So essentially, this is often talked about in the context of jobs and employment, but it also is super present on college campuses and universities. So the reason that I chose this topic is I'm a high school senior, and next year I will be moving on to a college campus. And this is something that I feel that I need to really be aware of moving forward as a student, and particularly as a male, to be able to identify where there might be an instance of sexual harassment and be able to mitigate those instances and also help those who may be victims of sexual harassment. So let's jump into some statistics. Does it happen often? I feel like there's definitely a disconnect between the data and what my peers understanding as well as my understanding, and the overall cultural understanding of sexual harassment. There's a disconnect between those two. What I hear often when I try and bring up sexual harassment to my friends, usually my guy friends, is I hear things like feminists are just picking fights, they're just argumentative and angry, they can't take a joke, they have no sense of humor, and really just defensive in general. Oftentimes I hear that like traditional masculinity is not sexism, so confusing like sexual harassment and masculinity. That's kind of a dangerous confusion that I hear a lot. So I want to lay those claims and defenses to rest with some analytical data and some objective data. So according to RAINN.org, college women are more likely to be sexually assaulted than robbed. So actually twice as likely. So there are two sexual assaults, two college women suffer a sexual assault for every one college woman who suffers from a robbery. And on top of that, specifically for sexual harassment, 62% of female college students report having been sexually harassed at the university, with 80% of the reported harassment being peer-to-peer. And that's from Michigan University. So clearly this is not just feminists and women not being able to joke around. This is not looking to pick a fight. This is a strong majority of female students on college campuses being sexually harassed. So furthermore, to get some male-driven data, 51% of male college students report sexually harassing someone in college, and 22% of male students admitted to frequently sexually harassing someone. So not only do we have an issue where a vast majority or a strong majority of women in college are being sexually harassed, a majority of men are comfortable in the fact that they are sexually harassing women, and 22% of them are comfortable in the fact that they are repeatedly harassing a woman. So we have both an individual issue, but more broadly we have a social, cultural, socioeconomic, or social issue, and the fact that sexual harassment is being confused as a joke or as traditional masculinity. So I think we need to be careful when we're talking about what's acceptable and what's not for men, and of course some men are sexually harassed too. That was listed in the findings, but that was a small minority of the victims. So we have a social issue examining that a majority of college men are comfortable in the fact that they have sexually harassed a woman. Another question that I hear a lot being thrown between my friends, and one that I have or did have coming into this assignment as well, is what constitutes sexual harassment? There is more of a gray area, and it's more circumstantial than just rape or sexual assault. And after researching, I feel that to figure out what constitutes sexual harassment, one needs to examine the power dynamic at play, as well as consent, and the relationship in the situation. So if you are a male and are talking to a female at, say, a college party, and you think the female may be uncomfortable, you need to examine the power dynamic. For example, are you physically constraining her from leaving? Are you intimidating her with your body language, or your tone? And also you need to check very carefully for consent. So is she reciprocating your vocal and physical cues? And if she's not, then you may want to check in or back off. So again, sexual harassment is more of a nuanced issue, and that is why it's important to listen to the person that you're talking to or conversing with, and be self-aware of how your body language and tone are creating a power dynamic in a situation. So, going forward, with this knowledge, how do schools and students prevent sexual harassment? And I think it can be broken down into two sections. One is a culture issue. Like I mentioned before, 51% of male college students report sexually harassing someone. So they are comfortable in their identity as a sexual predator. That needs to be addressed, obviously. That is far from okay and far from what masculinity should be in our culture. So, and the way to address that is if you see something, say something, right? So particularly for men, if you see one of your guy friends not just being sexist, but actually harassing a woman and using power dynamics and voiding her consent, you need to say something and call him out on it and take advantage of the privilege you have and your gender. Secondly, examine as men how your actions and comments are being received, and be empathetic and try to relate to the other person that you're talking to, particularly if that other person is a woman. And just be self-aware of your presence in a conversation or in a social situation. Secondly, we have a school accountability issue. So, for example, when we watched our film discussion from a couple weeks ago with the documentary about the UNC students who were sexually assaulted, the vast majority of the perpetrators got off with little to no punishment. So schools need to hold sexual predators accountable. There need to be fewer gimmick essays and more actual suspensions and expulsions. So schools should not penalize plagiarism more aggressively than sexual crimes. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a good night. Thanks.